The bell at Westridge High hadn't even finished ringing before the whispers started. Chloe Miller kept her eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor, her grip tightening on the straps of her worn backpack. She could feel their stares, the cool, assessing glances from the clusters of students who owned the hallway. Her uniform, a second-hand polo and khakis from the community donation box, felt like a neon sign announcing her place. Scholarship kid, outsider, other. Her sanctuary was a P-government third period. It was the one place where the rules were clear, where arguments were built on evidence, not family names. But that morning, the room felt different. Mrs. Thorne stood at the front, her silhouette sharp against the whiteboard. New this semester, she wore her authority like perfume, too strong, impossible to ignore. Her eyes, a frosty blue, swept over the students, lingering on the boys with letterman jackets before skating dismissively over the rest. "Take your seats," Mrs. Thorne said, her voice like polished glass. "We have a guest speaker today. A real-world perspective on civic duty." Chloe slid into her usual desk at the back, next to the window. She arranged her single notebook and a carefully preserved pen, a small island of order. The door opened, and a man in a crisp police uniform walked in. Sergeant Jason Miller, her father. Her heart gave a small, proud leap. He was here for career day, a fact she'd kept to herself, a tiny secret in a school that demanded everything else. "Class, this is Sergeant Miller," Mrs. Thorne said, a thin smile on her lips. "He's here to discuss law enforcement's role in our community." Her father nodded, his kind eyes finding Chloe's for a brief, warm second. He began speaking about community policing, his voice steady and earnest. He talked about trust, about service beyond the badge. Chloe listened, her posture straightening. This was her world, the world of duty and hard work her father had built for them. Mrs. Thorne listened with her arms crossed. When Sergeant Miller finished and opened the floor to questions, it was Brad Jensen who raised his hand first. Brad, whose father owned half the car dealerships in the county, lounged in his seat as if it were a throne. "Sergeant," Brad drawled, "my dad says the real crime problem in the city comes from certain neighborhoods, that the people there just have a different mentality. What's your take on that?" The room went still. Chloe's father paused, his expression carefully neutral. "Crime isn't about neighborhoods, son. It's about individuals and circumstances. My job is to serve everyone equally." Mrs. Thorne chuckled, a soft, dismissive sound. "An idealistic viewpoint, Sergeant, but perhaps a simplistic one. Some cultural contexts do breed instability. We see it in the data." She turned her gaze slowly, deliberately, until it landed on Chloe. "What do you think, Chloe? You live in the Grove, don't you? Does it feel unstable?" All the air left the room. The Grove was the oldest, least affluent part of town. Heat rushed to Chloe's face. Her father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This wasn't the question. It was a branding. "It feels like home," Chloe said, her voice quieter than she wanted it to be. Mrs. Thorne's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How quaint." She turned back to the front. "Thank you, Sergeant. A unique perspective." As her father left, giving Chloe one last worried look, the humiliation settled over her like a heavy coat. The lesson hadn't even begun, and she already felt exposed, her one safe space contaminated. The bell for the end of class felt like a reprieve, but as she gathered her things, Mrs. Thorne's voice cut through the noise. "Chloe, a word." Chloe approached the teacher's desk, the weight of lingering stares from her departing classmates pressing on her back. Mrs. Thorne didn't look up immediately, instead organizing a stack of essays with meticulous slowness. "Your father seems like a very dedicated public servant," Mrs. Thorne began, finally lifting her eyes. They held no warmth, only a clinical curiosity. "It must be difficult, having a parent in such a stressful line of work. The long hours, the danger, the clientele. He loves his job, Chloe said, forcing her voice to remain even. I'm sure he does. Mrs. Thorne picked up a stapler, clicking it absently. But it does make me wonder about your environment. The influences. It can't be easy to focus on constitutional theory when your home life is so charged. She pulled Chloe's last essay from the pile. At the top, a bold red B glared next to the comment, adequate research, but lacks the nuanced understanding of systemic governance. Attempts to overcompensate with volume. Chloe's stomach dropped. She had spent 2 weeks on that paper, tracing the 14th Amendment's application through 3 landmark cases. I cited primary sources and judicial reviews, she said softly. I'm not sure what I missed. What you miss, Chloe, is subtlety, Mrs. Thorne said, leaning forward. You write like you're filing a police report, bullet points and citations. Government, real governance, is about more than facts. It's about influence, heritage, and the instinct for power. Something that, frankly, isn't taught in the Grove. She slid the paper toward Chloe. Perhaps you should consider a more vocational track. Something hands-on. You clearly have diligence. You're just applying it to the wrong field. The words were a precise, surgical cut. They weren't shouted insults. They were delivered with the calm authority of a judge passing sentence. Chloe felt her face burn. She took the paper, her fingers trembling. I belong in this class, she whispered, more to herself than to the teacher. Mrs. Thorne simply smiled. We'll see. You can go. The hallway was a blur. Chloe moved on autopilot, the B, and the teacher's words echoing in her skull. She didn't see Brad Jensen and his friend Mark leaning against the lockers until it was too late. Hey, officer's kid, Brad said, pushing off the lockers to block her path. He mimicked Mrs. Thorne's condescending tone. The influences. Must be tough, having a dad who spends all day around criminals. Does it rub off? Leave me alone, Brad, Chloe muttered, trying to step around him. Mark, a hulking linebacker, shifted to cut her off. She told you to consider vocational, Miller. Maybe you can learn to fix our cars, he smirked. My dad's dealership is always hiring for the shop. The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. Chloe ducked her head and pushed through, their mocking tones trailing her down the hall. The injustice of it was a hot coal in her chest. The essay was good. Her father was a good man. None of it mattered. Here, her worth was predetermined by her zip code and her teacher's prejudice. She found an empty stall in the girls' bathroom, locking the door and leaning her forehead against the cool metal. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over, silent and furious. This was only the 3rd week of the semester. The thought of enduring months of this, of having her academic future, her ticket out sabotaged before it began, was a crushing weight. She took a deep, shuddering breath, wiping her face with her sleeve. Crying wouldn't help. But what would? The isolation became a palpable thing. In government class, Chloe's raised hand was met with a sigh or a pointed look elsewhere. Her contributions were met with an interesting, if literal, interpretation from Mrs. Vase Thorne, a phrase that soon became a private joke. Brad Jensen would cough the word literal into his fist whenever Chloe spoke, sparking muffled giggles. The rumors started subtly. Whispers that Chloe's scholarship was a pity award, a diversity checkbox for the school, that her father had connections that got her in. The story of Mrs. Thorne suggesting vocational school morphed into a tale that Chloe was being moved to. Remedial classes. Her only anchor was her best friend, Maya Rodriguez. They'd been friends since middle school, bonded over being the 2 town kids in a sea of suburban students. At lunch, Maya slid her tray next to Chloe's at their small, isolated table. Ignore them, Maya said fiercely, stabbing a carrot. Thorne's a witch. Jensen's a moron. Your paper was brilliant, and you know it. Knowing it doesn't change the grade, Chloe said, pushing her food around. Or the way everyone looks at me now. Then fight back, Maya urged. Go to the principal. Your dad. No. Chloe cut her off sharply. Absolutely not. I begged for this chance to come here. I told him I could handle it. If he storms in, it just proves to everyone that I'm a charity case who needs her daddy to fight her battles. I have to handle this myself, but handling it seemed impossible. The next week, Mrs. Thorne assigned a major research paper on checks and balances, worth 30% of their grade. I expect sophistication, she announced. Not just a recitation of facts. Show me you understand the spirit of the framework. Chloe threw herself into the work. She spent nights in the library, weekends annotating historical analyses. She crafted an argument about the judicial branch's role as a check on popular sentiment, using modern and historical examples. It was the best work she'd ever done. The day the papers were returned, Mrs. Thorne called Chloe to her desk after class. She held the essay without looking at it. Chloe, I have concerns about academic integrity. The floor seemed to tilt. What? This level of writing, Mrs. Thorne tapped the paper, is a significant, and I mean significant, leap from your previous work. The phrasing, the citations, it's not consistent with your established voice. I worked really hard on it, Chloe said, panic rising. All my sources are cited. You can check. I did, Mrs. Thorne said coolly. She opened a drawer and pulled out a printout from a premium online essay help service. A paragraph was highlighted. This service offers model essays. The structural similarity and several unique phrases here are suggestive. Chloe stared, horrified. The site was one she'd never heard of. I didn't use that. I've never even seen that website. You can't just accuse me because it's better than you expected. Mrs. Thorne's eyes turned to ice. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying you're wrong. The words burst out, fueled by weeks of pent-up frustration. That's enough. Mrs. Thorne's voice was low and venomous. She took a red pen and scrawled a huge, jagged F at the top of Chloe's paper. Below it, she wrote, Academic dishonesty. See me. This will be reported to the guidance office. A note will go on your permanent record. And your scholarship committee will be informed. She leaned in, her voice a poisonous whisper. You don't have the pedigree for this school, Chloe. You're a plotter trying to sprint with the thoroughbreds. Now get out of my sight. Chloe stumbled into the hall, the F burning in her vision. This wasn't just a bad grade. This was the end. The scholarship, her future, her father's pride, all of it, gone. Because a teacher decided she couldn't possibly be good enough. The injustice was so vast it felt suffocating. She leaned against the cold lockers, the world narrowing to a tunnel of despair. She was out of options. They had won. For 2 days, Chloe moved through school like a ghost. The guidance counselor, Miss Thompson, had given her a tired, sympathetic look, but said the process had to run its course. The weight of the impending disciplinary hearing was a constant ache. Maya tried to buoy her spirits, but the defeat in Chloe's eyes was too deep. On Friday, Mrs. Thorne requested Chloe stay after school for a mandatory meeting to discuss the plagiarism incident. The email specified room 214 in the old East Wing. A part of the school closed for asbestos abatement. A prickle of unease went down Chloe's spine, but skipping could be construed as an admission of guilt. She texted Maya her location, just in case, and headed there, her footsteps echoing in the empty, dimly lit corridor. Room 214 was stripped bare, smelling of dust and chemicals. Plastic sheeting covered the windows. Brad Jensen and Mark were already there. Lounging against the teacher's desk, Mrs. Thorne stood beside them, her arms crossed. Close the door. Chloe. Mrs. Thorne said the moment the heavy door clicked shut. Chloe knew she'd made a terrible mistake. There were no administrators here, no witnesses, just 4 walls and 3 people who despised her. "We need to understand why you cheated," Mrs. Thorne began, pacing slowly. "Is it pressure from home? The need to prove something?" "I didn't cheat," Chloe said, her voice trembling. She backed toward the door, but Mark moved to block it, his large frame a solid wall. "See, that's the problem," Brad said, pushing off the desk. "You keep lying. You lie about belonging here. You lie about your work." He walked up to her, sneering. "You're a stain on this school. A diversity hire who can't even do the basics without stealing." "My work is my own," Chloe insisted, her heart hammering against her ribs. She fumbled in her blazer pocket, her fingers closing around her phone. With a desperate, silent prayer, she pressed the side button, activating the voice memo function. The screen lit up for a second before she shoved it deeper. The microphone hopefully pointed outward. "Your work?" Mrs. Thorne laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "Your work is to take up space meant for a student with real potential. You have no finesse, no understanding of the world you're trying to enter. You're a blunt instrument in a world that requires scalpels." The hatred in her voice was naked now, freed from the constraints of the classroom. It was about more than an essay. It was about Chloe's very presence. "You're a racist," Chloe breathed, the truth of it finally crystallizing. Mrs. Thorne's face contorted. She stepped forward, her hand lashing out faster than Chloe could react. Crack. The slap was explosive, a shocking, wet sound in the empty room. Chloe's head snapped to the side. White-hot pain radiated through her jaw. Her lips split against her teeth, the coppery taste of blood flooding her mouth. Tears of pure shock sprang to her eyes. Brad whooped. "Damn, Mrs. T. World star!" Mark chuckled, a low, approving rumble. Chloe slowly turned her head back, touching her throbbing cheek. Her fingers came away, smeared with blood. She looked at Mrs. Thorne, who was breathing heavily, her eyes wild with a mix of fury and triumph. "You will withdraw from this school," Mrs. Thorne hissed. "You will confess to plagiarism. Or this," she gestured to Chloe's face, "will be the least of your problems. Do you understand? No one will believe a troubled girl from the Grove over a teacher and 2-star students. Your word against ours." In that moment, something in Chloe shattered and then reformed, harder and clearer. The fear was still there, a live wire in her veins, but beneath it surged a cold, focused rage. They thought they were untouchable. They thought she was nothing. She lowered her hand, standing tall despite the tremor in her legs. She felt the silent recording phone, a hidden witness, warm against her chest. "I understand perfectly," Chloe said, her voice surprisingly steady. The blood dripped onto her polo, a dark red bloom on the light blue fabric. She understood that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Chloe didn't run. She walked out of room 214 with as much dignity as she could muster, the metallic taste of blood still in her mouth and the ghost of the slap burning on her skin. She waited until she was around the corner, out of sight, before she allowed herself to lean against a locker, her breath coming in ragged gasps. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone. The voice memo app was still running. The timer showed 12 minutes and 47 seconds. She saved the file, labeling it with the date and room number, and immediately uploaded it to a secure cloud drive her father had set up for important documents. Then, she opened her camera and took several clear, well-lit photos of her face, the angry red welt rising on her left cheek, her split and swollen lower lip. She sent the file and the photos in an encrypted email to her father's personal address with a single, stark subject line: emergency. Need you at school now. She didn't call. He would be in meetings, his phone on silent. The email would ping his watch, a priority alert he only used for family. Her next call was to Maya. "Meet me at the main office," she said, her voice tight but clear. "And bring your phone." Maya was waiting, her eyes widening in horror at the sight of Chloe's face. "Oh my God." "Who did, Mrs. Thorne?" Chloe said flatly. "With Brad Jensen and Mark Davis as witnesses. I have it recorded." Maya's shock turned to ferocity. "What do? We wait for my dad. And we don't say a word to anyone until he gets here." Chloe led the way into the main office. The receptionist, Mrs. Gable, looked up and gasped. "Chloe, what happened?" "I need to speak to Principal Davis immediately," Chloe said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And I need the school resource officer present." While they waited in the principal's outer office, Chloe's mind worked with a cold, clinical efficiency. This was no longer about a grade or a rumor. This was assault. This was a hate crime. The recording in her pocket was a weapon. She thought of her father's lessons. Document everything. Stay calm. Let the facts speak. Principal Davis, a harried man in a too-tight suit, ushered them in. Officer Ruiz, the SRO, followed, his expression professionally neutral. Before the principal could begin his usual placating spiel, Chloe placed her phone on the desk. "Principal Davis, Officer Ruiz, at approximately 3:45 p.m. today, I was assaulted by teacher Elena Thorne in room 214. The assault was witnessed and encouraged by students, Brad Jensen and Mark Davis. I have an audio recording of the entire incident, including racial harassment and the act of physical violence." She spoke clearly, like she was reciting a report. "I have already preserved this evidence and notified my parent, Sergeant Jason Miller, who is on his way. I will not be making any further statement until he arrives." The principal's face paled. Officer Ruiz's posture stiffened. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. This was no longer a student complaint to be managed. It was a potential criminal matter. 20 tense minutes later, the door flew open. Chloe's father stood there, still in his uniform, his face a storm of controlled fury. His eyes found Chloe's injured face, and a muscle in his jaw twitched violently. He walked in, filling the small room with a presence that was both protective and dangerous. "Start talking," Sergeant Miller said, his voice low and lethal. "And somebody get me that teacher, now." The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. Mrs. Thorne, summoned to the office, arrived with her mask of professional concern firmly in place. It slipped the moment she saw Sergeant Miller and Officer Ruiz's stern faces. Brad and Mark, fetched from the football field, slouched in with defiant smirks that vanished when they saw Chloe's father in full uniform. Principal Davis, sweating visibly, tried to steer the conversation toward an internal resolution. "Sergeant, surely we can handle this as a school matter." "A terrible misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Sergeant Miller interrupted, his voice like granite. He picked up Chloe's phone. "Let's all understand perfectly." He tapped the screen and turned up the volume. The room was filled with the sound of their own voices from hours before. Mrs. Thorne's vicious diatribe. "You're a blunt instrument." Brad's taunts. "A stain on this school." The sickening, unmistakable crack of the slap and their subsequent laughter and threats. Hearing it played back in the bright, sterile office was somehow worse than experiencing it. The ugliness was laid bare, undeniable. Mrs. Thorne's face went ashen. Brad looked at the floor, his bravado gone. Mark shifted uncomfortably. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Sergeant Miller looked at Officer Ruiz. "You have evidence of assault, witness testimony, and racial harassment. What happens next?" Officer Ruiz, a good man who took his duty seriously, nodded. "That's enough for me. Mrs. Thorne, you are under arrest for assault and battery." He recited her Miranda rights in a steady monotone as he gently guided her hands behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound Chloe had ever heard. Mrs. Thorne didn't speak. Her head bowed, her career and reputation evaporating before her. "As for you two," Officer Ruiz turned to Brad and Mark, "you're material witnesses to a crime. We'll be contacting your parents, and you'll be giving formal statements. And I'm suspending you both from school grounds effective immediately, pending a disciplinary hearing for participation in harassment and intimidation." Principal Davis sputtered. "Now, wait. Brad's father is on the school board. Mark's family are major donors, and my daughter is a student who was assaulted by a member of your staff while you failed to provide a safe environment," Sergeant Miller said, stepping into the principal's space. "Your concerns about donors are noted and will be included in my formal complaint to the district, superintendent, and the school board. I'm also filing a civil rights lawsuit against the district for negligent supervision and fostering a hostile educational environment." The principal sank into his chair. Defeated, Chloe watched it all, a quiet strength settling in her bones. The helplessness was gone. The system, the real one her father believed in, was finally working. As Mrs. Thorne was led away, she glanced back at Chloe, her eyes filled not with apology, but with a final, bitter hatred. Chloe met her gaze evenly. She felt no pity, only a clear, cold certainty. Her father put a firm hand on her shoulder. "Let's go home, sweetheart." In the car, the adrenaline finally ebbed, and the tremor started. Sergeant Miller pulled over and wrapped her in a hug, letting her cry into his uniform shirt. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there sooner," he whispered, his own voice thick. "You were there when it mattered," Chloe mumbled. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Dad, this isn't over, is it? The Jensens. They'll try to fight it. Let them try," he said, his expression grim. "They're not up against a scared kid anymore. They're up against me. And we have the truth." The story exploded. It was too salacious to contain. Racist teacher assaults black student. Father is police sergeant. Local news picked it up, then national. The audio clip, with voices obscured, but the slap horrifyingly clear, played on cable news. The school board emergency meeting was packed and televised. Chloe sat between her father and a family attorney, her face mostly healed, but the memory vivid. Brad Jensen's father, a blustery man named Richard, ranted about anti-white bias and a setup to extort the district. He demanded Mrs. Thorne be reinstated and Chloe expelled. Then, Chloe's father stood. He didn't shout. He projected a quiet, formidable authority that silenced the room. "My daughter came to Westridge for an education, not a persecution," he began. "She was targeted, harassed, and finally assaulted because of where she lives and the color of her skin. This wasn't a disagreement. It was a hate crime, captured on tape. The teacher you hired failed the most basic test of her profession. The principal failed in his duty to protect his students. And parents like Mr. Jensen," he turned, pinning the man with a stare, "who teach their children that wealth and connections make them untouchable, are the reason this environment was allowed to fester." He placed a folder on the table. "This is a formal notice of our intent to sue the district, the principal, and the Thorne and Jensen families for damages. We are also filing criminal complaints for witness, intimidation, and conspiracy after we uncovered text messages between Brad Jensen and Mark Davis, plotting further harassment against my daughter to shut her up. The police have those messages." Now, Richard Jensen's face turned purple. "You can't prove. It's already been proved," the family attorney said smoothly. "The digital forensics are quite clear." The school board president, an elderly woman named Mrs. Peabody, looked at Chloe. "Young lady, is there anything you'd like to say?" Chloe stood. The room seemed to hold its breath. She looked at the hostile faces of the ensigns, at the ashamed principal, at the curious and sympathetic crowd. "I just wanted to learn," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. "I just wanted to be judged on my work, not my address. Mrs. Thorne told me I didn't have the pedigree to understand government. But I think I understand it better than she ever did. Government, at its best, is the promise that the rules protect everyone equally. That a teacher can't slap a student for being poor. That a bully's last name doesn't make him a king. That's the lesson I learned here. It's just not the one in the curriculum." She sat down. The silence was profound, then broken by a single person clapping. Then another. Soon, a wave of applause filled the room, not from the board, but from the gathered community members and parents. The vote was swift. Mrs. Thorne was terminated immediately, her teaching license to be revoked. Principal Davis was placed on administrative leave pending an independent investigation. Brad Jensen and Mark Davis were expelled. A district-wide audit of disciplinary practices and teacher training was mandated. As they left the meeting, Richard Jensen stormed past them. "This isn't over, Miller," he snarled. Sergeant Miller didn't break stride. "Yes, it is." The first day back at Westridge after the hearings felt like walking into a different school. The silence that had once felt hostile now felt like a space catching its breath. Some students avoided Chloe's eyes, ashamed of their past complicity. Others, many she didn't even know, offered small, hesitant smiles or nods of respect. Her new AP government teacher was Mr. Evans, a young, energetic man who treated every student's idea with genuine interest. Her first paper for him came back with an A and the comment, "Precise, powerful analysis. Your understanding of the practical application of justice is exceptional. Welcome to the debate." The biggest change, however, wasn't in the teachers, but in the students. Chloe and Maya, with the support of Mr. Evans and the now activist school board, started a peer advocacy group called The Equal Voice. It was a safe space for students to report bullying, academic unfairness, or discrimination without fear. They worked with the administration to develop clearer reporting channels and student-led diversity training. One afternoon, Chloe was in the library helping a shy freshman who was being teased for his accent. As she showed him how to structure his argument for an English paper, she saw Brad Jensen walk by with his new bodyguard, Us. Requirements since his father's business was now under scrutiny for various irregularities. Brad didn't look at her. The empire of fear he'd ruled had crumbled to dust. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table with her father, she finally felt a sense of peace. The lawsuit was settled. The funds were put into a college trust and a local community youth program. Mrs. Thorne was facing criminal trial. The system, as slow and flawed as it was, had worked. "You know," her father said, sipping his coffee, "I spent my career believing in the law. But you showed me what it looks like to live it. You were braver than any cop on a beat." "I was just tired of being afraid," Chloe said. "And I had a good example to follow." He smiled, the pride in his eyes brighter than any trophy. "What now?" Chloe looked out the window at their quiet street in the Grove. It wasn't a mansion-lined boulevard, but it was full of hard-working people and resilient kids. It was home. "Now," she said, "I think I finish high school. Maybe go to law school. And make sure the next kid like me doesn't have to get slapped to be heard." She had learned that dignity isn't given. It's claimed. And sometimes, claiming it requires you to stand up. Blood on your lip and truth in your pocket, and force the world to see you not as they imagine, but as you are, unbroken and capable of extraordinary justice.